More than a century after one of the most tragic events of the 20th century, a question continues to divide governments, historians, and international lawyers. Can the world hold Turkey accountable for the deaths of approximately 1 to 1.5 million Armenians during the final years of the Ottoman Empire? For many historians and more than 30 countries, the answer begins with a single word: genocide. For the Turkish government, however, the story is more complicated. Turkey rejects the characterization of the events as genocide and argues that the deaths occurred amid war, civil unrest, famine, and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. The debate has lasted for generations. It has affected diplomacy, international law, historical memory, and relations between Turkey and Armenia. But beyond the political arguments lies another question. Even if the events are recognized as genocide, can a modern state legally be held accountable for actions committed more than a century ago by a predecessor empire? This is the story of the Armenian Genocide, the debate over recognition, and the difficult question of accountability. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was in decline. Once one of the world's great powers, the empire had lost vast territories and faced growing internal tensions. Among its diverse population were Armenians, a Christian ethnic group who had lived in eastern Anatolia and surrounding regions for centuries. Many Armenians were successful merchants, farmers, professionals, and religious leaders. Yet tensions between Ottoman authorities and Armenian communities increased during the late 19th century. Violence against Armenians had already occurred during the 1890s under Sultan Abdul Hamid II. These massacres killed tens of thousands and deepened distrust between Armenians and the Ottoman government. By 1914, the Ottoman Empire entered World War I on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary. The war would become a turning point. In April 1915, Ottoman authorities arrested hundreds of Armenian intellectuals, religious leaders, and community figures in Constantinople, now Istanbul. Many historians view this date, April 24, 1915, as the beginning of the Armenian Genocide. Soon afterward, Ottoman authorities ordered mass deportations of Armenians from their homes. Entire communities were forced to leave. Men were frequently separated from women and children. Many deportees were marched hundreds of miles toward the Syrian desert. Survivor accounts describe starvation, disease, exposure, robbery, and mass killings. Historians estimate that between 1 million and 1.5 million Armenians died during the deportations and related violence. Today, the overwhelming majority of genocide scholars and many historical institutions conclude that the destruction of Ottoman Armenian communities was deliberate and systematic. The word genocide did not exist in 1915. It was coined decades later by lawyer Raphael Lemkin. Lemkin helped develop the concept after studying mass atrocities, including the Armenian case and the Holocaust. In 1948, the newly formed United Nations adopted the Genocide Convention. The convention defined genocide as acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Many historians argue that the Armenian case fits this definition. Turkey disputes this conclusion. Turkish officials argue that wartime conditions, intercommunal violence, disease, and military conflict contributed to the deaths, and that there was no official policy aimed at exterminating Armenians as a people. This disagreement remains one of the central controversies in modern historical memory. Over the decades, an increasing number of countries have officially recognized the Armenian Genocide. Among them are France, Germany, Canada, Argentina, Russia. In 2021, Joe Biden became the first sitting U.S. president to formally refer to the events as genocide in an official statement. For Armenia and many descendants of survivors, such recognition is an important acknowledgement of historical suffering. For Turkey, these recognitions are often viewed as politically motivated and historically disputed. The issue continues to affect diplomatic relations worldwide. This is where the debate becomes even more complicated. Many people assume that recognition automatically creates legal liability. In reality, international law is far more complex. Several obstacles exist. Obstacle 1, time. The events occurred more than 100 years ago. The Genocide Convention was adopted in 1948, decades after the Armenian killings. Many legal scholars argue that applying modern genocide law retroactively presents major challenges. The events occurred under the Ottoman Empire. Modern Turkey was founded in 1923 under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Questions arise regarding the extent to which a successor state bears legal responsibility for actions committed by a predecessor government. International courts generally require jurisdiction and legal mechanisms that may not exist for events occurring before the relevant institutions were established. As a result, criminal prosecutions related to the Armenian Genocide are highly unlikely today. Some activists and scholars argue that accountability does not necessarily require criminal prosecution. They point to other possibilities. Formal acknowledgement, historical commissions, cultural preservation, return of religious properties, financial compensation, diplomatic reconciliation. Others argue that reparations would face enormous legal and practical difficulties. Questions would include: who would receive compensation? How would losses be calculated? Which properties could be identified after more than a century? These questions remain unresolved. Today, the debate extends far beyond courts and governments. For many Armenians, remembrance is about honoring ancestors and preserving historical truth. For many Turks, concerns include historical interpretation, national identity, and fears of legal or territorial claims. Historians continue to examine archives, documents, diplomatic correspondence, survivor testimony, and military records. While political disagreements remain intense, scholarly research into the events continues. More than a century after 1915, the Armenian Genocide remains one of the most consequential historical debates of the modern era. Many countries, institutions, and scholars recognize the destruction of the Ottoman Armenian population as genocide. Turkey rejects that characterization and continues to dispute aspects of the historical and legal interpretation. Can the world hold Turkey accountable? The answer depends on what accountability means. If accountability means international recognition and historical acknowledgement, that process is already ongoing. If accountability means criminal prosecution, international law presents major obstacles. If accountability means reconciliation, dialogue, and confronting the past, the discussion remains unfinished. One thing is certain: the events of 1915 continue to shape politics, diplomacy, and historical memory more than 100 years later. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe for more historical investigations, geopolitical analysis, and in-depth documentaries on the events that continue to influence our world today.